Welcome. My name is Okubo Benabo. Subsistence farming generally is farming operations aimed at harvesting for food. The practice often occurs on small parcels of landmass, which, for the purposes of farming for food, has been specified as of minimum dimensions of 9 feet by 7 feet, but it could be larger, or by integration to be of square footage of 63 square foot, and with one direction, preferentially of larger dimension, that may be adopted as the length dimension. And then the land mass is called subsistence farm. As preparation of the land, a stipulated requirement designated parcels of the land to have topsoil of at least 6 inches of preferably humid soil called ridges, and the planting of the food crops have been performed along these ridges formed on the ground. For some finicky farmers, though, the preference is the emplacement of elevated beds at the locations at which the ridges have been advised. The objection have been the concerns about the groundwater and possibly ground-inhabiting pathogens coming in contact with the food. However, in so doing, certain dynamics are lost in the quality of the farm produce ultimately harvested. There is a fundamental interaction between the ground chemical physics dynamics and the crop plants and the plants during the growth period that are excluded, but not to be, that should not be excluded. Of course, by chemical physics dynamics is meant such interactions as geomagnetic fields and the crop plant radiation energy conversion to earth matter, internal energy factors as connected through thermodynamics, effect of re-emission, and sunlight absorbance and re-emission dispersion effect on the crop plants. While the impacts of these interactions are not well understood in science, perhaps until deep knowledge of these are evolved, might be better to preserve them and as such practice subsistence farming in consistence with the practice of nature. In synopsis then, this episode entitled Sunken Beds Subsistence Farming proffers guidance on preparing the landmass to address the needs of finicky farmers that yet aligns with the practices so far proffered, the approaches to creating explicit sunken planting beds, and elicit the fundamental benefits of planting in sunken beds in the ground as opposed to using elevated beds. The driver rationale guiding the implementation of sunken bed subsistence farming has the core object of practicing the age-old farming practice of having crops planted in the ground such that the crops and harvest are infused with the benefits of contact with the ground, just as trees and wild plants have had since time immemorial. In fact, to the careful listener of the episodes on the planting of the essential crops, the preferred method of planting, and has been promoted, has been the sunken bed farming. More specifically, as part of the preparing of the soil for planting, a certain dimensional hole, cylindrical in shape, is dug out into the ground and then refilled with biofertilizers. Then again, the center of the biofertilizers may be scooped out to some specified dimension that is either usually of the cylindrical shape, otherwise concave lens, or truncated conical shapes. In each case, the planting is performed within the biofertilizer-filled cylindrical space. These digs into the ground through the ridges effectively constitute sunken beds. After all, the natural ground is effectively still somewhat not used directly as to come into direct contact with the plants. Agreed, though, that the finicky farmer may not find this satisfactory all the same, so a level of improvement of the method to further isolate the plant as formalizing the method is advanced. For that objective, the method of implementation must necessarily still allow these chemical physics dynamics interactions to prevail. From the perspective of physical separation between the ground and the biofertilizers, the approach is to insert a material cylinder of the size of specified hole to be dug out. The chemical physics dynamics requirement then demands that the material of cylinder not be magnetic as to allow permeability of the magnetic fields, geomagnetic fields, also be of high thermal conductivity as to rapidly transfer the heat effects of the radiation conversion into the biofertilizers. And for the effects of light absorption and re-emission, the material that must be also optically transparent at the wavelength of the re-emission would be nice. But such imposes unusual demand on the simple farmer and may be admitted as a deficiency in formalizing the sunken bed farming method. Additionally, however, the material should be able to exist in a thin thickness and also not corrode as not to contaminate the plants and tubers. A material for the earlier conditions includes silver, aluminum, and tantalum. Of these choices, material made of aluminum offers the least expense and is preferred, although the best of the choices tantalum, but that also happens to be the most expensive. In any event, given the material of choice, the form of adoption for the farming is a container of vertical cylindrical walls with a base, as with most cooking pots or aluminum cups without handle. At the base of the container is cut out a hole just big enough to which is affixed a check valve, which allows fluids to flow out but not flow in. Then at each locale at which a hole is to be dug out, such container vessel of the specified dimension is inserted after the dig out and about a quarter inch to the brim, so rain does not overflow into the biofertilizers container. And then the biofertilizers poured into the container until filled to the brim. The rest of the crop farming procedure as given is then followed to effect the planting. Although distinctly separated invasively, the biofertilizers bed and the ground yet non-invasively interacts via chemical physics dynamics. For instance, the absorption and conversion of radiant heat into the thermal energy of matter often involves vibrations that emit energy waves, and because the aluminum is non-magnetic, allows these waves to pass through the walls and interact with the tubers and the root nutrients, absorption dynamics, and hence affects the plant's growth positively. Other interactions could also be elicited, such as clearly supports the natural state of plant growth under the preferences of the finicky farmer who chooses to adopt the sunken beds farming approach. The conclusion that could be drawn at this time is that the structured farming approaches that have been preferred in the farming activities of farming for food so far is somewhat unique in implementation to the extent that it constitutes sunken beds farming, and each bed being defined by the geometric scope of the biofertilizers filled holes. Also, sunken beds farming has several benefits, the true worth of which is not yet fully researched and documented, yet has been shown by the elicitation of the dynamics of non-invasive interaction as still occurring between the crops, tubers, roots, and crop plants, and as such ought to be adopted by subsistence farmers, as is the case in most emergent countries. A mere adoption of the farming approaches preferred with special sunken beds container, even finicky farmers could allow themselves to benefit from the non-invasive dynamic interactions between the earth and the plants as naturally occurs. And it is a wrap. On that note, I say to you, thank you so much for having come to listen to this observation about efforts aimed at alleviating world hunger through subsistence farming by both urban dweller farms and emergent countries' small farm farmers. You are truly appreciated, and if you'd like to get privileged viewer or reader information, or access podcasts of specialized contents, or access even vertically integrated concepts, then I implore you to join my supporter club and enjoy that privilege status. Moreover, while still here, do please take a moment and subscribe to the channel as to be informed of the publication of every new episode as soon as it is released. Again, thank you. Bye. Till next episode.